another episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. Today's guest is Pascal Fuchshuber, a fellow European. Born in Paris, educated and lived for his formative years in Germany. We're going to hear his story, how he came to go from Germany to Texas to Massachusetts, and to California, where he's spent the last 30 years as a surgical oncologist. We'll hear his journey in cars and how he started with a 911 Porsche that he inherited. Not a bad start. So without further ado, let's move now to hear the stories of Pascal Fuchshuber. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives. Yeah, I should definitively start and clarify with you that it is Fuchshuber.
Jawohl. Very nicely done. How did you learn that? It's actually Austrian. It's like Schwarzenegger. It's the Austrians use those double names. The Germans have very short names, as you know. It's like Schmidt and the Austrian have these double names. And we come from a family of Austrian immigrants in 1640, when the King of Austria, the Emperor of Austria, sided with the Pope and started the Counter-Reformation. And our family had become Protestants, like many Austrians. And the King of Prussia was very happy about that, because he just had all these open spaces in East Prussia, Königsberg and Danzig and all these places that didn't exist then very much. And he invited all the Protestants from Austria to come and populate those places. And there's a new Salzburg in East Pomerania. Just like there's a New York.
Yes.
It's fair. I mean, immigration and all this stuff has happened forever, right? It's not something new.
Yeah.
And whoever didn't want to leave either had to go back to Catholicism or had their head cut off.
Oh, nice.
And we have family Fuchshubers that are Catholic, very, very successful. They at one point they owned a quarter of the land of Salzburg. Very rich family. Unfortunately, the Protestants always remain very poor. And then they settled in the north of Bavaria, which is today called Franconia, because this all happened right after the 30-year war and the pestilence. So 80% of the population was dead, and there was these fields with basically bracken fields, and they just went there and started all new. And since then, so I'm German. My mother's French. I was born in Paris, and I grew up in Paris for a short period. Then my father went back to Germany, and I lived in Cologne for 27 years in Germany. Went to school, university, did my PhD, and then got a DAAD, which is the equivalent of the National Science Foundation grant.
Okay.
To do 2 years of research in tumor immunology, because I wanted to become a surgical oncologist, which didn't exist in Germany. And at the time, I was not on very good foot with my boss. I didn't like the way he was the whole way in Germany. Actually, still like that.
Yes.
That's a whole new chapter to talk about.
Yeah.
I wanted to run away as far as I could, and I took the opportunity to never come back.
Yeah, I have seen, when I lived in Europe, I was in Germany many times, and it's a very hierarchical system, and the boss is definitely the boss. And
I'm not made for that. I have a very strong French Jewish streak in me. My mother is Jewish, and very liberal, and that didn't work for me. And the American system, you have to admit, it has its downsides. A lot of crap gets taught because there is really no structure, and everybody does it pretty much the way they like. Now we're starting to kind of come together a little bit in the world about how we do surgery, but it's still a very, very far cry of what it should be. And
Yeah,
you better be in a good place to train in America to get trained well. That's the flip
yeah. I
side.
mean, what I've always said to people about America is that everything you say about it is true, because it's a very big country.
You
Um,
bet.
so somewhere it's the best, it's the worst, it's the richest, it's the
The
poorest.
stupid, the
It's
most intelligent.
everywhere.
I've met the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life in this country, but also the most stupid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
So yes, thank you for having me, John. I have to say, John and I know each other for a long time, but we have really never spoke together on Zoom or have met in person. But we run the Surgeons Garage Facebook group, which has over 320 surgeons by now that are all interested in cars. And I think that's where our nexus is between the two of us. And
actually,
I'm so glad John is taking it a step further with this initiative and this sort of project to place us on YouTube. I very much appreciate all the work you do. It's fantastic. Thank you very much for having me.
yeah, my pleasure. It's it's keeps me off the streets like yourself, um, so as I said, you born and brought up in France and Germany, and
So,
so what was the first car you remember in Europe?
oh well. The first car I drove, and I was 9 years old, was a Peugeot 404.
Oh,
Beautiful car
yeah, the
with a
404. Yeah,
the 404 with the injection, the 110 horsepower, 1.8 liter motor with the first mechanical Bosch injection that was put in a car in a serial car, like a big
yeah,
company car. And why Bosch and why were they able to do it? I know the story, and the story is just amazing. The German flag, the famous 8-8 flag from
hmm,
World War II. This is this is one of the producers at one of the radio companies in Germany who was a young flak helper told me that they had a rudimentary computer. And the way that computer worked, it was a piece of steel formed arithmetically. The surface was basically
right,
the equation of speed, angle, and elevation, if you wish. I don't know the details. And there was a little pickup that followed that the surface, and it was set at the speed and the height of the oncoming aircrafts, so
no,
that they had a 1 in 100 chance to actually hit the aircraft. And then they when they moved the flag, it moved according to the surface of this metal
hmm,
potato. Pretty much was the size
yeah,
of a potato. And Bosch had the same principle in their first mechanical injection, because the problem with the fuel injection is that depending on the rev, the timing of the injection has to be different to
yes,
to get the
yeah.
efficiency out, and also to calculate how much fuel should go in.
Was that the
And they
same?
didn't do
Was that the same injection that they put in the 300 SLR when it was the race car? The direct injection?
that. I don't know. I don't think I don't I, It could
I
be.
think it was. That was the
It
first
was.
direct
Yes,
injection.
yes. I think this was the first race car where they did it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then they
yeah.
and the Peugeot, which is the if not they're as old as Mercedes. There's some great stories about how Peugeot helped Mercedes, and Mercedes sent them their first engine, Daimler, when they started doing the first cars in the last decade of the two centuries ago. And they were a very innovative company in that respect, always been. And so they were the first ones. I think before even the Germans used it, it
And
was a
they,
German built injection.
of course,
Um,
if we fast forward to your later life, Peugeot also had a role
So
in the naming of your Porsches, because they
exactly, yeah,
did they didn't if I recall correctly, they sued Porsche for calling their first car the 901.
right.
They
Because all
claimed that
the yeah,
they owned the O in the middle.
which is true
Yeah,
when you think about it. I mean, it's like the 707, the 70,
yeah.
the Boeing. I mean, they had that, and Porsche understood this very quickly, and luckily so, because 911 sounds so much better than
Yeah.
901.
So you came to the States in 1987, yeah, and
Yeah.
to MD Anderson.
So yes, I went to MD Anderson on a research grant. So I did 2 years. Interesting. My light just came out. That's okay.
It's fine, no worries.
So I was I wanted to become a surgical oncologist.
Hmm.
The decision to do immunology was the decision of my boss.
Yeah.
So at the morning rounds in Germany, every morning, everybody sits down, the boss is in the front, and everybody's facing the boss. And we go over the admissions from last night. And even the most senior people getting yelled at and screamed at by the boss. And I've seen grown. I was the first. I was in my first year. I was a nobody. I mean, we were on the last row in the back, and there was like 10 rows in front of us. And a grown man would stand up crying and leave the room. I mean, that's how
Mm.
um, demeaning, I would have to say. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
so I'm sitting there minding my own business, tired from being up all night, and all of a sudden I hear my name being yelled at, and I raise my look, and then the boss is saying, "And Fuchshuber is going to be my immunologist."
So
That was it,
that was news to
and then
you, you know.
and then I later I went to one of his sub bosses, and I said, "What does that all mean?" He said, "Well, try to get some grant money. He wants you to go to MD Anderson for 2 years." So I said, "Great," and
That's
that's
interesting. When was brought up in Ireland in medical school in Ireland, and I went to spend some time in Leeds in England. And my boss said to me, I think it's time for you to do 2 years of research. And I went, okay. And I said, what are we going to do? And he said, tumor immunology. Uh,
oh, that's so
so,
look at
so
that.
I
Isn't
wrote my
that funny?
doctoral thesis on interleukin 2 and
No way. I did my whole work on interleukin 2 activated T cells,
yeah,
natural killer cells.
yeah,
I worked
sure.
I worked with Eva Lutzova, who came out of Rosenberg's lab at the
Yeah.
NIH. I mean, we spent millions of dollars because these little vials of IL-2 then were
Oh,
worth their
sure. Yeah,
weight in
yeah, yeah,
gold.
yeah.
We
And
had
yeah, one of the
three
people I
interleukins.
visited in those days was, of course, Josh Fiedler. Um,
Yeah, I
um,
interviewed with him. I
who
almost ended up in his lab, but I didn't like him as a person.
he was interesting, I think.
I had met him. I had done some PhD tumor models in Germany, and I went to Greece once and gave a speech, a talk, presented my data, and he turns to me and says, "That's too clean. I don't believe it." I mean, I was like, I
Yeah,
said, "Okay, well, I said, yes, sir," and that was it. But he didn't, then I ended up in MD Anderson, and there was a point where the decision had to be made where I should work, and Rafe Pollock, who was
yeah, I know very
who
well.
was
Yeah,
he was a fellow when I came, and I ended up in his lab to
yeah,
start with, because
yeah,
he just finished fellowship and he was taken over, and so I know him. I mean, we did research together for almost 3 years, and he said, "Well, you can look around." So I said, "Okay." And he said, "Why don't you look?" No, Dr. Oda. Dr. Oda was another attending who had worked with Fiedler. He said, "Hey, you should go and talk to Fiedler." So I did,
yeah, yeah.
and I still didn't like him.
So when you were in MD Anderson, what were you driving around in?
Good question. I bought for $300. I bought a 1972 Buick Limited coupe.
Wow.
And I was proud as heck. I remember taking the car, parking it side by side to a extended length 560 Mercedes SEL, biggest limousine, and it looked small, and sending it to my friends in Germany and said, look, I got a bigger car than that.
Yeah.
And
And
it drove.
they used to, those type of cars would, pass everything except a gas station,
But listen, when I arrived in Houston, gas was 73 cents a gallon.
Wow. Yeah.
And
Just as well.
that thing had a 25-gallon tank.
Yeah.
And that was what, $15 to fill up, or $20. And it lasted for 200 miles.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
mean, I never drove much with it. It was just to go basically to work and
Yeah.
back. And
Sure.
it eventually gave up his soul by cracking the motor block.
The block.
And
Yeah.
I sold it for scrap for $100, which was still, I thought, was
That's
a
not
pretty good
bad.
deal.
Yeah. It's
And
not bad.
then I bought an MGB.
Ooh. Wow. That's a bit of a difference.
Yeah, I was in the experimenting phase then. And that's where I met my wife with, and she still remembered to this day that the car was a really nice looking car and really kind of
Sure.
sort of a chick magnet, if
Yeah.
I may say so, even today, although I apologize for all the people that feel offended, but that's the word she used. But when it rained, the car
Oh,
stopped.
yeah.
And
Mm.
there's several times during these heavy Texas
Yeah.
downpours,
Yeah.
we were kind of stranded because the very elegant Lucas Electric just
Yes.
didn't like rain.
The Lucas Prince of Darkness
The
electric.
Prince of Darkness. You know what I'm talking about.
I do, yeah. I mean, well, the electrics, the same Lucas stuff was in the Jags as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I think they started off pretty good, but then in the later years, the car industry in Great Britain suffered a lot
sure, yeah.
from lack of attention, right?
Now
Or
you never went home, back to Germany. You came in '87 and never went back.
I went back just to visit, but
Yeah.
I tried. After I was done with residency, I went to Germany because it just had opened up the East. And believe it or not, the only dedicated cancer hospital in Germany was in East Germany. It was the in the outskirts of East Berlin,
The
and it
Max
had been,
Planck.
yeah.
Is it the Max Planck?
No, that's not the Max Planck. It was called Buch, Berlin Buch
Ah, okay.
Clinic, and it had been taken over by a very famous, blank on his name, surgeon from the West. And I
Okay.
went to interview, and I had done 3 years of research. I'd published 15 papers. I'd done 5 years of training. I could do any operation.
Sure.
You know how training in the United States is a little different than in Germany. And I arrived there, and he looked at me and said, well, your publication factor is only blah, blah, blah. And yeah, you can start as a first year resident if you want. And I'm like, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. And I had a hard time convincing my wife, who is Chinese,
Yeah.
to come with me to Germany. She said, I'll give you 4 years, because even at that time already, the racist undercurrents,
Yeah. Mm.
especially in the East,
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
were
Yeah. Sure.
pretty bad against foreigners in general.
So
I'm not talking.
you went from one extreme to the other, from Texas and oil and cowboys and to the liberal heartland of Massachusetts.
Well, um, yeah, it's a whole new beautiful story, classical story of an immigrant to the United States at our level in terms of education and stuff. So after I decided not to go back to Germany, after my I was a project investigator, got a pretty good check for that for 2 years with Eva Lutzova in her lab. I decided to stay, and then the question is, how am I going to become a surgeon? Because I still wanted to become a surgeon. Some of my colleagues had changed and became radiation oncologists because they really wanted to be in the lab for the rest of their life. But I really didn't think that that was me, and so forth. So I went to Rafe Pollock, and he said, "You're going to have a hard time because you have never worked in an American hospital. You have no pedigree to speak of."
Yeah.
And they don't know Germany, even though I was an AOA student and all of that. I
Yeah.
mean, I had all the trimmings from Germany. He said, you should go to the match, and you can put in 4 or 5 surgical cases, universities,
Yeah.
but put one internal medicine. So I put one internal medicine for Schwartz in Rochester, New York. And then 4 universities invited me for an interview for surgery. Portland, Trunky, someplace in Memphis, I don't remember.
Okay.
University of Chicago and UMass.
Right.
Trunky knew my boss Troidel very well. So
Yeah.
I had a little bit, but they still said, we just have too many good people from America, and we can't deny them a position for somebody we don't know.
I didn't realize your boss was Troidel.
Yes.
So he and I
Don't tell me.
no
Don't tell me.
no he and
No, I mean, this is going to take another hour, this interview, I can see.
he and I were awarded the honorary fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons of Glasgow on the same day.
But it's funny because I was awarded the honorary fellowship of the Association de Chirurgie Française, the second oldest one. And I was in the room with very, very famous people, and it was, so it must have been a very funny thing for you to be with him in the same room and see him.
I think there were 5 of us at the same day. Jonathan Meekins was another one.
Yes,
who all on the same day, and it was organized by a guy called David George, who was a wonderful man, breast surgeon, who was the chair of surgery in Glasgow.
well,
and of
Troidel knew
course, as
Gullit.
you know,
Yeah.
I was in Rochester for 8 years, where Cy Schwartz was in the next office to me. So
I could have ended up there.
good
That was
friend
19.
of mine, lovely
Yeah,
man, you know.
lovely man. I
Yeah,
mean, I went for the highest possible that I thought was the best
sure.
medicine, because I said, and so to continue that story, I got a letter from him and said, yeah, you have a job. And then, and I'd gotten a letter of, I didn't get in any of the other places. So then came my personal American moment. I just said, that cannot be. I am a good man. I am AOA. I worked very hard. Why don't, so I just picked up the phone and called the 3 program directors and very, very, very politely just said, I just want to learn for the next time so that I can, what did I do wrong? And it was just, I was true to myself. I was really feeling that way. I was so naive. And the guy in Worcester, Massachusetts, who was a very nice guy. I love him to this day, but I forgot his name. He was the program director.
Mm-hmm.
He said to me, "But Pascal, you matched for the categorical program." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, there's a preliminary," and I didn't know.
Yeah.
And he said, "Look, we have an ENT guy that just didn't come.
Yeah.
And I have a 2-year preliminary spot for you." And I didn't know what that meant. I later found out, and I just immediately said, "I'll take it."
Yeah.
And he said, "Yes, but did you get did you? So I had to tell him that Schwartz had, and he said, you got to get a letter that Schwartz lets you out of this thing. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wrote to Schwartz, and he was very magnanimous and
sure.
probably had 15 other people that wanted to work for him, just like me. He wrote me a letter, and I got in.
So,
Boom.
if we fast forward, you did your residency there, and then
Only 1 year.
1 year.
And
Uh,
then I was married already,
right.
and my wife was in Houston. And so after the first year, that was just by pure chance. After the first year, the program director says, "Look, Pascal, you are at the top third of your class." I mean, I worked really hard. I went at 3:30 in the morning. I went to the hospital to round. Patients were like, "Doctor, you're really early,"
Yeah,
because we had to know all the labs by heart. It was like a
sure. Yeah,
Harvard
yeah.
type training, which for me as a German was still very
It's
leisure.
normal, you know.
It was like everybody was complaining, and I was like, no, that's really easy here.
Yeah.
And so so he said, unfortunately, we don't have a categorical spot for you, but I just found out that in Houston, UT Houston has an opening as a second year. Do
Ah.
you want to go? And I said, well, yeah, that's perfect because that's who I want to go back to. So
You
I
went
was just
back, yeah,
lucky,
yeah. And then
very lucky.
you ended up in Roswell for your surgeon, yeah,
Right. So then a part of the training at UT is that you do two big rotations at MD Anderson. I'd worked at MD Anderson
yeah,
for doing research. I knew everybody. I I knew I was probably not going to be at the level where I can get in anyway, because I mean, MD Anderson already at that time was looked at as at least as good, if not better than Memorial. So all the
yeah.
really top people from
Went
the
to one or
top
the other, yeah,
universities, I still was compared to somebody
sure,
coming from Harvard, I was a nobody. And they have their chief calling the chief, you know how it goes.
yeah,
So
sure, sure,
I was pretty sure. I mean, I applied for MD Anderson as a surgical oncology program, but of course I didn't get in. And then I got an invitation from Nick Petrelli.
yeah,
And to me, Nick, to this day, is still the greatest educator in surgical oncology of the entire United States. We beat MD Anderson, we beat Memorial at the yearly, when there was this in service. We
yeah, yeah,
just
yeah,
he was just the consummate, nice-hearted, demanding but fair
yeah,
educator.
yeah,
Like I've not met anybody like him. He's still alive. I think he's in Delaware. And an extremely funny guy. He played in a punk band during the time of Ramones in New York.
the
So he knew
Ramones,
he
yeah,
knew how to a punk band or rock band, and he
yeah,
played the electric guitar. He knew how to have fun. When we had the party when we were done with 2 years, I mean, we bunch of guys took him and we put his face into the cake, and he loved it.
yeah.
That kind of
You
guy.
know the other guy who's a big, really skilled musician and knowledgeable, of course, is Jeff Matthews, in the University of Chicago. He released an EP, as it used to be called, a half,
Really?
maybe a year or so ago. Very
Wow.
knowledgeable, skilled guy. He's a real polymath, is Jeff Matthews. So
He's at Sages. I think he's like on the board of Sages. No, maybe
yeah,
I'm confusing him with
yeah,
Brent Matthews. I'm confusing
yeah,
him.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
confusing him.
So Roswell, and then Kaiser for 20 plus years.
So then at that point when I was done with my surgical oncology, I went to Nick and I said to
These
Dr.
are
Petrelli,
cars, by the way, so we're allowed to have a glass of wine,
yeah, I'm having my coffee of the afternoon. Thank you.
It's the
The
time
wine,
difference.
the time I was going to say, just wait 3 hours and it'll be a glass of wine. Especially I'm not on call today. So Nick said, um, what do you want to do? And I said, I'm going to try to stay in academics. Although I had already a little bit of a feeling that that was not really what I wanted. I mean, I was, I came from a very academic
It was the
family.
right thing to say, though.
Right.
Mm.
And I went to Monica Moro at University of Northwestern. I went to MD and to UT.
Right.
I went to Hopkins. I interviewed with
Yeah.
Cameron,
With Cameron. Yeah.
who offered me a 140,000 a year job at the
Yeah.
Bayview,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and it sounded really bad.
I think that job is still available, actually.
Yeah, it's probably still available. But I was like, and then I had the best interview, the best academic interview was at Morgantown, University of West Virginia. They offered me two secretaries, $160,000 startup money for a lab. I mean, it was great.
Yeah, but it was West Virginia.
And so Anne was with me, my wife, and she said, I'll give you at most 4 years here. I could feel the eyes of the people in the back of my head.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And so I said to myself, and then I was one evening I was perusing the New England Journal of Medicine, I mean, of all places, and there was an ad for surgical oncology in California. And I had my first meeting, my first big American College of Surgeons meeting where I had a poster and Rafe Pollock had a talk. And it's the first time I met Cameron because Rafe Pollock was introduced by Charlie Balch to Cameron as a future leader in surgery. And I was standing at his side. Interesting moments there, never forget.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
And I was sitting on the steps of Moscone Center, which was not as big as then. It was a bright, sunny day in October. And I said, this is the best place I've seen on this world, but I probably will never make it here. I remember saying that.
Mhm.
1989 or 88.
98.
Nah, 88. This was just a year after I came. I had
Oh,
done some
oh,
research.
really?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
1988.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I had said that. And then
Yeah.
I saw this ad. So I
Oh,
said,
now
and let's go.
yeah.
Yeah. And so I went to interview and it was fantastic. They offered, I had first of all, it was the nicest group of
Uh-huh.
surgeons I've ever worked with.
That's the most
First 10
important
years.
thing. Mm-hmm.
My chief was sort of the Clint Eastwood kind of type, physiognomic, both coolness and gentleness and kindness and competency. I mean, I pictured him operating on a patient and taking a telephone out and say, just put that to pathology without changing the tone of his voice
No
or anything. I
panic.
mean,
Yeah. No
yeah,
panic.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so I was the first surgical oncologist that they hired. So they had realized that they couldn't continue without one. I mean, they
Mhm.
were doing Whipple procedures with a 10% mortality rate.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so,
And they were not alone, I mean, in those
oh
days.
no, 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 in those days, no. So I started there and I promised them, that I would do 1 year of everything. I would pay my dues as a general surgeon, but then I would become a surgical oncologist and
Yeah. Yeah.
but luckily I continued to do general surgery call every month, 2, 3, 4 nights till the end of my career there. And
Yeah.
it was Silverstein was at UCSF using the first radio frequency ablation machine,
Oh,
that
yeah.
little reader box,
Yeah.
50
Yeah. Yeah.
watts.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
could do hardly any harm to anything with this
Yeah.
thing. And I thought that was a great idea. I went over there for a week. He taught me how to do it, and I became. I mean, I had been trained in hepatobiliary surgery, but I didn't have a
Yeah.
hepatobiliary fellowship. But I taught myself in large
Yeah.
part, and I became almost an
Yeah.
internationally known
Him, the guy.
haplobilly surgeon within a system of a private hospitals, if you wish.
Sure, sure.
And I remember once I had a patient, my first patient with the cholangiocarcinoma, which is sort of the most difficult surgery
Yeah.
you can do.
Hmm.
I mean, a Whipple is easy compared to
Yeah.
that, especially if it's a centrally located one. And I said, this is a little bit of a number too big for me. And I called Roberts, who was the chief of transplant at UCSF. He was the husband of the chief of surgery there. Her name I forgot.
Nancy
And
Asher.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then he said to me, well, Pascal, I have never done one. And
Yeah,
he said, why don't you do it?
yeah, that's
And I
great.
do it. I did. I did.
Yeah.
I did. We had good CT scans. We had good interventional radiologists. I've had very good pathologists. I mean, we all had good stuff.
All of what you wanted. Yeah.
And then I pushed for, and then we hired two more hepatobiliary surgeons, and
Wow.
we became the center, except that eventually the higher ups decided to put it somewhere else, and
Yeah.
I left. I mean,
So,
that this
so in the time that's left to us, let's talk about some cars. I'm looking at the models behind you, and two or three of them I recognize, and at least one of them I suspect.
So
Uh,
here's my little CMC collection. It's
yeah,
mostly pre-war Formula One,
yeah.
and then as you can see, but there are some cars I have down there is a Peugeot. You can see a Peugeot 4 and a
Yeah.
little Renault 4, which I drove, and I drove a 2C a
Well, I was
Citroen.
thinking, I was thinking behind you. I was trying to work out what some of them were. I think I can see a Cobra and a 911, and I'm pretty sure that's a 250 short wheelbase Ferrari that's sitting there. And
That's
I'm thinking to
exactly right.
myself, I'm not going to talk to this guy if he owns a 250 short wheelbase Ferrari.
No, I'm just dreaming of it.
Just the 1 in 18 model. So what was your first non-transport car when your journey, when you'd stopped moving and life had settled and you got, a dollar or two, or maybe not, but when I know you had you had a Toyota that you put 350,000 miles on. So what was the first
So,
car of
uh,
interest, if you like?
do you mind if I take a little bit of a discourse on this and
Sure.
excurse on it? I grew up both a few miles away from the Montlhéry Linas racetrack in France, which is the
Oh
second
yeah,
oldest,
yeah,
1925.
yeah.
Ascari died there. When I was at my grandparents' house in Paris and in the countryside there, close to Paris, I could hear the cars racing, and I could basically drive half a mile and walk through the woods and get over um, a wall, and I was on the track, and there was nobody. So
Wow.
that was one, and I was like 9, 10, 11 years old. And Cologne is about 50 miles from the Nürburgring. And my
Yeah.
father was a big, he liked fast cars, but he never had one. But he would take us. And I remember I was 9 years old and I was standing at the edge of the asphalt of the track at the Nürburgring at the Mühle after the Adenauer Bridge when it goes up, which is a really dangerous, fast, dangerous right-hander because it goes like this. And I saw the blue. I remember to this day the blue Tyrrell of Jackie Stewart, who was I mean, he was the guy,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course he was.
and go whooshing by, and the red Ferraris, who I don't remember who was in there, but that kind of stuck with me. So I was always very interested in cars, and the first car that was kind of not transportation because I really didn't need a car in Germany was this thing, which is a 203 Peugeot. This is the
Oh
lion on
yeah,
the front.
yeah, yeah.
And I bought this for like $1,500 on the side of the road in France, and I restored it a little bit at my grandparents, and I brought it to Cologne. and I had the interior done. I spent a little. I had already a little bit of money then, and then I sold it when I went over to the United States.
Yeah.
And I kind of sort of always liked cars, but I was way too busy to even think about it. And by the time things relaxed a little bit, one day my wife says, my godfather died, and they have a 911 Targa. They want to give it to you because you're always interested in cars.
Wow. Yeah. That's a tough choice, you know.
So I
Tough
said,
decision.
and I had not thought about at that point to actually start anything with cars. So
Yeah.
it was kind of sort of brought to me, and for $400 I had the car brought over. It it his nephew had tried to start the engine with water in the
Uh,
engine, and had I still have the piston. I'm showing you. Hang on.
and it presumably wasn't running at this stage. I mean, it was as you say, he tried to start it with things were not good.
Am I still on?
Yeah, no, I was going to say presumably it wasn't running at this stage.
So this is look at this thing.
Yeah,
That is one of the
bent. It says
pistons,
bent.
and then the rod is bent, and that's a thick big rod.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
from a
yeah.
911 SC 3-liter engine. And I was lucky. I met this old guy, a former Porsche mechanic, the in Lafayette, which is down the road, who had this little shop, and I became his friend. I had a German newspaper come and do a thing about him because he really was very, very good. And he put the car back together for very little money.
Yeah.
He said he sold me an injection system that was broken for $1. He said, "Oh, I got one up there. I'll charge you $1 for it." But he did a complete engine, and then the brakes and a fuel system. That was the classic things to
And
do.
you still have that car,
And
yeah?
I still have that
Yeah,
car.
yeah. I mean, it's as when people are watching the video, I'll be able to show the pictures of the cars that you sent. I know you sent me that car as well.
Yeah.
And then you have a
So
993, don't you?
yeah, and then this after this 911, the next car that I bought for everyday use was a Corvette C5. Happened to be a colleague of mine who became too old to get into the car, and I bought it for very cheap, and I loved it. And then so that's kind of a becoming a collector's car. But and then my wife, the next thing happened is that my wife had to drive one of our daughters to school in San Francisco, and she needed a two-seater to go on the HOV lane without paying, because you either had to be three people in a
Yeah,
regular car, or you had to have a two-seaters with two people. You could use
yeah,
it, and that's a half an hour time gain over the
yeah,
regular
sure.
traffic.
Yeah, sure.
So I was looking at one point, so that was the next car, and it's a 2002 R129 Silver Arrow 500 SL Mercedes.
Oh,
That
yeah.
was the cheapest. That was cheaper than the Honda 2000, or you name it. I got it for $12,000.
This is your kid going to school and you give them a 500 SL?
And so I bought this car for my wife because it was the cheapest car I could find. It was a
Oh, you bought
two-seater.
it for your wife. Okay.
Yes.
That's
And
fine. Yeah.
she loves this car to this
Yeah,
day.
they're
She
great cars.
doesn't want to get rid of it. And I
Yeah.
have to say, from all the cars we have, it's the nicest car to
Yeah,
drive.
I
It's
had
just,
one for when I was in Rochester. I had one for a couple of years. It had this
they are
funny,
just,
it had this funny thing that it wasn't quite level, and they kept trying to, the air suspension.
oh, you had an air suspension. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I have the one with the steel.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they,
So,
they, they
but
don't
it's a
recommend to,
great. I mean, they're great cars,
yeah,
those, and
yeah.
they still are.
Oh, yeah. It's just,
Um,
it's just, I think the most comfortable steel suspension that was ever made for a car.
yeah, no, they're great cars. And as I
And
mentioned
then,
earlier, the seat that you have the 993 as well.
yeah. And so then I drive to work through the street of a couple of blocks from here, and I see this guy with this 911 993 souped up, and turns out that his daughter is going to the same school than my daughter, and we start becoming friends. And he is a fanatic. I mean, his son is now 19 years old. He's on the we talk about him on the Facebook side. Becoming a professional driver. His son was then three. Yeah. Brad Liu.
I've seen
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
young
yeah,
kid,
yeah.
Lou, Brad Liu is the name of the father, and Bryson
Yeah.
Liu is the name of and he's in a Lamborghini series and is winning and is going to Europe and was in Le
Yeah.
Mans and everywhere. This son was 3 years old when I met, and
Wow.
he was racing in the kitchen, and his father was trying to teach him to do a power slide on a tricycle.
So, and his dad
And
is
he had this car,
his dad is
and then
Brad.
Brad Liu.
Yeah. So he must
And
have
so
spent most of his money on his son at
Oh
this
yes.
stage.
Oh
Yeah.
yes. I'm sure he did. And more than he has,
Yeah.
probably.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I don't touch the subject lightly because
No,
I
no. I mean
know.
that famous phrase, how do you make a small fortune going racing? You start with a large fortune.
Right, exactly.
And,
But
yeah.
the kid, so far, there were points where they were shortly, they were really thinking about not going the next step because it was just like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh, and the rest. Yeah, and the
and
rest.
going everywhere, and the kid
Yeah.
got COVID in Indianapolis because
Yeah.
I mean, you have to go.
It's
So anyway, he one day, and I look at his car and he lets me drive it. It's a 993, a little bit modified,
yeah.
not in terms of engine and power, because that car doesn't need any more power, but
No.
it has a metal on metal suspension system. It has Moton shocks on it, which are at the
Yeah.
time were the best shocks that you could change. It has Recaro racing seats and the RS, most importantly, the RS brakes, the largest brakes you can put on this car.
And we were able to see from the pictures that it's currently in the intensive care unit, or
No,
in
it was.
at least in the hospital anyway.
Yeah, I had to have the shocks redone. They were completely broken because all of a sudden I'm thinking, man, that car doesn't really hold the road anymore. What's going on? And I thought that, and one of the stabilizer links were broken, and the shocks were all broken. So that's the photos I sent you when I took everything apart and put it back together. And he sold me that car, and I paid quite a bit for it. But I was so in love with that car, I wanted to have it, and that's started it all. That really was the first time I put extra money in a lot of extra money into a car because I wanted it, just because I
And
wanted
then
it.
it's you have the two 911s, and then from the sublime to the ridiculous with the Cadillac,
Yes,
which is the size of Rhode Island. I mean,
approximately. Yeah,
yeah.
it's in the east-west expansion of it.
But at least you can put the entire office in the back of the car.
So I love, you know, as an immigrant to the United States, and as I already described, I fell in love with these big American
Yeah,
cars. And
yeah.
I have another surgeon that Din Nguyen,
Hmm.
who has a whole collection of Cadillacs. I mean, he has some beautiful
Right,
things.
right.
And
Yeah.
when I went to see his cars, I fell in love with it. And so I took a long, long time to look at all the different years, and this 62 year, just that was just what I
That's the
wanted.
one that did
So
it for you. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And I got a very good deal on it. They're now getting to be very, very
yeah.
expensive. And I love it. I love it because it's also a car I mean, I can take the axle out, the back axle, and put a new bearing on. And these cars, you can really do
Yeah.
everything yourself,
It's pretty
you
simple.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
yeah.
pretty simple. And
And then
and
in terms of brute force and ignorance, there's, the poster child for brute force and ignorance is a 427 Cobra. You
that
know,
was before the Cadillac.
oh, was it?
Oh
Okay,
yeah, that
yeah.
was before the Cadillac. And then that was I was in full swing, in full deliriums,
No, that's
tremens.
I think it's called full midlife crisis,
Yeah, full midlife crisis.
Yeah,
Yes, I mean,
exactly.
from top to bottom,
So
and
I've got a few standard questions, that I was going to ask. I've asked everyone in this process, and so I'll fly them by you to see what your reactions to. So the worst car you ever had?
I think it had to be the Buick,
The which?
the Buick Limited.
Oh, the Buick. Yeah, the Buick. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you gotta say that was
Sure.
a close second would be the MGB, or maybe the MGB versus the
Yeah.
Buick.
The Buick was only $300 for heaven's
Yeah,
sake.
so maybe the MGB then, because really it's a beautiful car, but it's
I had when I was a
just
research
not well
fellow,
put together.
a fellow in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. I bought the previous fellow's Pontiac Bonneville for $400, and it was of course rusted, and it had a huge front bench seat, electric bench seat, and
Yeah, electric.
at the
Exactly.
end of the year, and it just devoured fuel, but it did it what its thing, and at the end of the year, I sold it for $400.
There you go. Same story.
It's probably still driving around Rochester as we speak. So, what was your the flip side, the best car you've ever owned, and or one that surprised you by being so good?
Well, that really depends on the criteria, because there's a lot of different best cars that way. I think from the right the pure pleasure of driving, it was the Renault 4, because I maybe that's because I'm jaded, because I was young,
They were
and
rolling
I
you
was
over, rolling
and
you over.
you c- it was just such a pleasure to be always at full speed.
Yeah,
And you could drive pretty much every street at full speed, and that
and
was
that
kind of
really
nice.
bizarre gear
And
change,
it's a beautiful, comfortable,
Yeah,
and the engine had enough suppleness that it didn't matter which range, RPM you were. And it was practical, light, and it was like a good horse that would drive you home at night, without you putting too much effort in where
well,
you're
so I'm going
going.
to ask it in a different way. The best car. So today, of your cars, you can only have one. Which is it?
The 911, the 1980 911 Targa.
The Targa?
Yeah, and
Even
the
though
reason,
even though
yeah,
it leaks the same as the MGB, because they all
no,
leak
it doesn't.
those Targas,
Yeah,
no?
no, actually, that I told you that was done by this race mechanic.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
he told me you got 200,000 miles on this engine and it's not going to leak, and it hasn't leaked so far.
No, I
And
meant the
it's
roof.
Oh, the roof. Yes, of course, but I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't really rain in California, so yes. Oh, that is so
Yeah.
funny that you mentioned that, because one of the Troidal's senior assistant had exactly that car,
Mm.
and he, I don't know how many times he came in cursing about the roof
Oh,
leaking in
yeah.
Germany. Of course, where it rains almost every other day.
The modern
No, but
Targas don't apparently. They
no,
don't.
they don't.
They don't
But
leak. So
in terms of like drive, and it's like the perfect relationship between weight,
yeah,
ability to road hold, and horsepower. It's
yeah.
just perfect.
Yeah,
It's
and
fun to drive.
it's really fascinating when you see 911s now. I've had a few 911s over the years, but the modern 911s are big, big, big cars.
Huge cars,
Yeah, and the little things like as you say, the Targo, or indeed the 911 Ts and Es, they're tiny little things. They're
tiny
electric
little things, and
cars.
they're such a fun to drive, because
Yeah,
it's almost like
yeah,
it's almost like a mini, almost like a
yeah.
mini, with a
Yeah,
little bit more horsepower.
I had a 356 for a while. I mean, it's just like a Volkswagen Beetle on steroids, etc. So if you budget is not a limit, and you have one dream bucket list car, what is it going to be? Is it a model in your office there? Is it one of those models, or what? Budget mode?
No,
No.
I hang on. So one would be for show, and that would be a Packard. I
Oh yeah,
love I love these types of cars, and it
yeah,
would be an eight Packard,
yeah,
sort of like this. I mean, this thing is indestructible. I mean,
yeah,
there's still people driving these cars that they bought them new in 1930.
sure, yeah.
They're still driving them around today. I mean, the not the same person, but the same family every day. And then the other one would be a DS, Citroen DS, a
Yeah.
convertible.
Oh, I saw you put a post up of a Chaperon.
That's
I
the
mean,
one.
they are
That's the one. I mean,
just
that's me.
magnificent things.
Yeah,
And
magnificent.
there's no way that car would ever be made today by a
No way.
rational,
You
you know.
couldn't copy that. No,
Well, I mean, Citroen, and in when they were making these cars with their suspension, I mean, it was just spectacularly sophisticated at that time, and still is today. There's
it
nothing
still
like,
is today. I mean,
um,
you drive one of these cars once, and no other car can give you that. Um, Not only the comfort of it, but the total security that you're going to get to A to B, even if a wheel falls off.
it's interesting. I did years and years ago, 20 years ago, I did a Monte Carlo rally historique in a MGA, and it's a little thing, but quite suitable. And we were flying around the cols and stuff like that around Monte Carlo, and a guy in a Citroen DS who was in the
Oh,
rally came past us as if we were standing still.
yeah,
And it was nothing to do with power. It was
no,
the fact the handling of the thing was
those
just
things.
unbelievable.
There's a story of Charles de Gaulle they tried to kill him, the military, because he stopped the Algerian war, which was the right thing to do, in my opinion, and everybody's opinion. But there was there was almost a military coup in France. And he was driving through a street in Paris, somewhere on the outskirts, and they had people with machine guns. And he was driving in the back of one of these DS's. That is still was very long, was the car
Yeah.
for the president and I still, now it's still a Citroen, I think. I'm not sure. They shot two wheels flat, and the guy was able to go at, you know,
Yeah.
80 miles an hour and leave and
Yeah.
save them, because the car was totally drivable at high speed with two flats.
They're
Just
remarkable cars. So just in the last couple of minutes, Pascal, do you have any big car adventures or ambitions? Number one, it's a two-part question. And second, is there an event you want to do or anything like that? And the other question I was going to ask you was, where do you think the cars have helped you in terms of, or have they helped you in terms of the balance of life and work, and detuning from work, the stresses of work? Some people are, we are both. We've mentioned a few of them tonight, and people that we both know who, their lives were exclusively in the office, and in the hospital, and they didn't
mm,
have a life outside. For
mm.
you, what does that mean?
So to answer your first question,
Mm-hmm.
I have not really looked at having cars being a social thing very much. But now that I have the Cadillac, things have changed a little bit. That is a social car. I mean, you go and buy some beer at the supermarket and it'll take you twice as long as normal because people start talking to you. And my plan is, I have a good friend in New York, Dr. Shah, who is the chief of surgery at one of the big hospitals there. And he talked to me about some car events. And I said, when I told him I had this car, he said, you got to go cross country. And so one day I will do that. That'll be, big deal. And I'm going to take Anne and we're going to try to drive this car cross country. Why not? And then the other thing that I'm doing this year, which is based on what you suggested, is to go to Goodwood. I've been following Goodwood forever on YouTube. I'm enamored with the videos and the show and the people and the way it's done. I've always thought it was the greatest show on earth. So finally, I'm going with one of my friends who is also a car enthusiast. So that would be that. And I'm probably going to start going to some of these cars and coffee events every Sunday, which are all over the place. I mean, almost every little village now has one of these things. It's kind of interesting. I didn't know until recently.
I'm hoping to get to Goodwood this year. I have not been for 3 years, and I will expect to see you in an appropriate period outfit.
Yes, we already, Chris and I are already talking about how we're going to handle that. But he has
1948 to 66 is your window of fashion,
We'll get there. And then in terms of what did cars? So I think I'm a surgeon because I started working on cars when I was 9 years old. I mean, I like the hand-eye coordination mechanical thing in life. That's just me. I love that. And the instant gratification that you put something together and it works, or it doesn't. And then you have to start over, but that's still, and
doesn't always work like that in surgery.
No, it doesn't always, though, and not with cars either, right? But the advantage with the cars, of course, is that the engine is not running while you're doing it.
Exactly.
But yes, of course, it gives me something that nobody else does in my family, and I think that for me, as old-fashioned or macho or that might be, it gives me a thing where I can close the door and that stuff doesn't happen. Something else happens. I think that's important because for me personally, I live in a household that's very Asian. My mother-in-law lives with us. I have 3 daughters and 1 wife, so I'm surrounded by women. And it might sounds a little fishy, but for me that is important, to have something where I don't have to listen to conversation. That's important for me. And also I just like being in the driver's seat. I mean, come on now. It just fits, right? I mean,
exactly.
You're responsible for your outcomes. You're responsible for what you do, and with all that comes with it. It's not really a relaxing thing. I think going to the garden and making sure everything is more relaxing, in the sense of relaxing, but it fits the bill. Fits the bill.
It ticks the box. Well, Pascal, listen, we're out of time, but thank you so much for spending the time talking to me today. There are lots of for people watching, there are lots of other surgeons already signed up. Pascal's story is of Europe across to the United States is a fascinating story. I'm going to be talking in the next videos to surgeons in the UK and surgeons from around about the United States, transplants, and various others. So as I said before, press the subscribe button, press like, and send us your comments. And join us again for another conversation for surgeons and their cars.